The morning Marcus Hale stepped out of his black SUV on Fifth Avenue, he was already 2 phone calls deep into a merger that would add another $300 million to a portfolio he had stopped counting years ago. He wore a charcoal coat that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and he moved through the city the way powerful men always do, as if the sidewalk had been built specifically for him, as if the crowd parted not by coincidence but by design. He had places to be. He always had places to be. He almost didn't see them. They were tucked against the stone wall near the entrance of Harrington Park, just off the main walking path, a small woman with silver hair and a boy who couldn't have been more than 15, both of them sitting on a flattened cardboard box. The woman's coat was thin and pale blue, the kind that might have been lovely 30 years ago. The boy was wearing a too large gray hoodie and cracked sneakers that had seen too many winters. They weren't asking for anything. They weren't holding a sign. They were just sitting together in the cold April air, the woman's head slightly bowed, her shoulders trembling in a way that Marcus recognized, even from a distance, as crying. He stopped walking. He didn't know why. He had walked past suffering before. Every person who lives long enough in a city either grows numb to it or breaks under it, and Marcus had chosen numbness a long time ago as the more efficient option. But something about the stillness of the scene made his feet refuse the next step. The boy wasn't ignoring the woman. He wasn't on a phone or staring at the ground in embarrassment. He was leaning slightly toward her, one hand resting gently on her back, moving in slow circles, the way you comfort someone you genuinely love. Marcus ended his phone call. He stood there for a moment longer than he intended, watching. The boy said something to the woman, too quiet to hear from where Marcus stood. Whatever it was, she lifted her face, and Marcus could see now that she was old, truly old, the kind of old that carries decades of hard living in every line, and that she was crying not from cold or hunger, though those things were likely true too, but from something deeper. The grief kind of crying. The lost kind. He walked toward them before he had decided to. The boy saw him first. His eyes went sharp and careful immediately, the way street kids learn to look at well-dressed strangers, measuring threat, measuring intention, ready to move. He shifted his body slightly in front of the woman, a gesture so instinctive and protective that Marcus felt something move in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. "I'm not going to bother you," Marcus said, and he meant it, though he understood why the boy's expression didn't soften. I saw her crying. I wanted to make sure everything was all right." The boy said nothing. The woman looked up at Marcus with red-rimmed eyes and tried to compose her face into something dignified. "We're fine," the boy said. His voice was steady and older than his face. "You don't look fine," Marcus said, and then immediately felt the bluntness of it. "I'm sorry. That came out wrong. I just meant..." He stopped. He crouched down instead of standing over them, an instinct that surprised even him. "My name is Marcus. What's yours?" A long pause. Then, quietly, "Jalen." "And her?" Jalen looked at the woman. Something passed between them, a conversation without words, the kind that only exists between people who have spent real time together. "Miss Elaine," he said. Marcus looked at Elaine. She had collected herself somewhat, dabbing at her eyes with the cuff of her thin coat. Up close, he could see the careful dignity she was trying to hold onto, her silver hair pinned neatly. Despite everything, a small cross on a thin chain at her throat. She had the face of a woman who had once had a life full of structure and warmth, and who had lost that life piece by piece until she ended up here, on cardboard, in the cold. "Miss Elaine," Marcus said gently. "What happened?" She looked at him for a long moment, deciding. Then she said, in a voice thin as paper, "My son was supposed to come. He said he'd come in March. It's April now." She paused. "I just got tired of waiting, I suppose." Marcus felt those words land somewhere they weren't supposed to. He had a mother. He had a mother he hadn't called in 11 days because the merger kept eating his evenings and he kept telling himself he would call tomorrow. He felt the specific and awful quality of that coincidence settle into him like cold water. "How long have you been out here?" he asked. "Since November," Jalen answered for her. His voice was matter of fact, not asking for pity. "We found each other in the shelter on Clement Street. They separated men and women, so I used to sit with her at meals so she wasn't alone. When the shelter lost its funding in February, we came out here together." "You've been looking after her," Marcus said. Jalen shrugged with one shoulder, as if the alternative had never occurred to him. "She looks after me too." Marcus looked between them, this 15-year-old boy with careful eyes and cracked shoes, and this elderly woman with a cross on a thin chain, and felt something that wealth had slowly, quietly, efficiently buried in him over the years, beginning to work its way back to the surface. It was not pity, it was closer to recognition. The recognition of what people are capable of giving each other when they have nothing left to offer but themselves. He sat down on the pavement beside them. His charcoal coat touched the concrete. He didn't think about it. "Tell me about yourself, Jalen," he said. And Jalen, perhaps because Marcus was sitting on the ground with them instead of standing above them, perhaps because something in Marcus's voice had shifted into something real, began to talk. He had grown up in the East Side, he said. His mother had struggled with addiction since he was 8. He had 2 younger sisters who were now with his aunt in Georgia. He had stayed behind because his aunt's apartment was too small and he hadn't wanted to be a burden. He said that last part simply, without drama, and it nearly destroyed Marcus. He had stayed behind, at 14, in a city of millions, because he hadn't wanted to be a burden. "Are you in school?" Marcus asked. "I was. I want to go back." He said it the way people say things they have stopped expecting. "I'm good at math. My teacher, Mr. Okafor, he used to say I had a gift for it." A pause. That was before the shelter, before everything. They sat in silence for a moment. A pigeon walked past with the unhurried confidence of an animal that has never been hungry in a city full of crumbs. Somewhere down the avenue, a taxi horn bleated twice. Marcus looked at Elaine. "Your son," he said carefully. "Do you know how to reach him?" She opened a small worn purse and removed a piece of paper folded into quarters, the creases soft from being opened and refolded many times. A phone number was written on it in blue ink. "He gave me this before I lost my apartment," she said. "I've called it twice from the shelter phone. The first time it rang and rang. The second time," she paused and carefully refolded the paper along its old lines, "a woman answered and told me he had moved." She said it without anger. That was the thing that cut deepest. She said it with the exhausted acceptance of a woman who had long since made peace with being disappointed by the person she loved most. And yet she had kept the paper. She had kept it folded in her purse, and she still cried in April because he had said he'd come in March. Marcus stood up. He wasn't sure what he was about to do, only that the version of himself who had been officially numb was no longer available. "I want to help you both," he said. "Not because I want anything from you. Not because it'll make me feel better about myself, though maybe it will. Just because." He stopped and looked at Jalen, at the way the boy's hand was still resting lightly on Elaine's back, "because someone should." Jalen looked at him with those careful, measuring eyes. "Why?" he asked. It wasn't hostile. It was genuine. Why, of all the people who had walked past them that morning, had this man in his expensive coat stopped and sat on the ground with them? Marcus thought about it honestly. "Because you reminded me of something I forgot," he said. He made calls. That afternoon, he made more calls than the merger had required all week. He contacted the director of a transitional housing organization he had donated to twice without ever visiting, a woman named Drive. Patricia Osei, who answered with the efficient warmth of someone who spent her days solving exactly these kinds of problems. He arranged for Elaine and Jalen to be placed together, as a unit, in a family transitional apartment on the north side, a 2-bedroom with heat and a kitchen and a window that faced east. He showed up the next morning with Dr. Osei to take them there himself. He didn't send a driver. He came. Elaine cried when she saw the bed with its clean white sheets. She stood in the doorway of the small bedroom and pressed both hands to her mouth and cried, and Jalen stood beside her and did not cry, but his jaw worked and his eyes went bright and he looked at the ceiling for a long moment the way boys do when they are fighting very hard not to fall apart. Over the following weeks, Marcus found himself returning. He told himself at first that he was checking on the investment, making sure the placement was stable. But he knew that wasn't it. He came because Elaine made strong tea and asked him questions about his life with the direct curiosity of a woman who has survived enough to have no patience for small talk. He came because Jalen was enrolled in school again. Marcus had found a program, had pulled strings he hadn't known he still had sat in a meeting with a school administrator and made the case personally, and because sometimes Jalen would show him the math problems he was working on, spreading them out on the kitchen table with a focused intensity that made Marcus think of himself at that age, before the money had come and quietly replaced everything else. He came because one evening, sitting at that kitchen table while Elaine washed dishes and Jalen worked through a geometry proof, he realized that this apartment on the north side was the place in his city where he felt most like a person. He called his mother that night. It was late, and she answered on the second ring in the way mothers of a certain age always answer late calls, quickly, with the particular alertness of someone who has been half waiting. He talked to her for an hour and 40 minutes. He cried twice. She cried once. He apologized for the 11 days, and for the weeks before that had also gone by, and she said what mothers say, which is that she understood, which is not the same as saying it hadn't hurt. 3 months after the morning on Fifth Avenue, Jalen came home from school and placed a test paper on the kitchen table in front of Marcus with the careful casualness of someone trying very hard to appear calm. It was a mathematics exam. At the top, in red ink, was a number, 98. Elaine appeared in the kitchen doorway, unable to contain herself, her whole face luminous. "I already saw it," she announced. "I've been waiting all day for you to see it." Marcus looked at the paper. Then he looked at Jalen, who was looking at the table, his jaw tight, fighting that same ceiling ward battle with his eyes. "Mr. Okafor was right," Marcus said quietly. "You do have a gift." Jalen looked up then, and his face was open in the way 15-year-old faces are when the armor comes off, completely, suddenly, without reservation. "I want to do something with it," he said. "I want to actually do something with it." "I know," Marcus said. "We're going to make sure you can." Elaine set a cup of strong tea in front of Marcus and put her hand briefly on his shoulder as she passed. "The way you touch people you have decided belong to you." Marcus thought about the morning 3 months ago, the charcoal coat, the merger call, the way his feet had stopped walking without asking his permission. He thought about how close he had come to not stopping. How many mornings had he not stopped? How many cardboard boxes had he passed without crouching down? He thought about the first thing Jalen had said to him that morning, the 3 quiet words that had cut through every layer of efficiency and distance and carefully constructed indifference he had spent 2 decades building. 3 words that were not a plea or a demand or even a request. 3 words that were simply the truth of who that boy was, stated plainly on a cold April morning to a crying old woman on a piece of cardboard. "She looks after me too." That was it. That was the thing that had broken him open. Not suffering, not need, not the image of poverty that the wealthy learn to navigate around like a familiar obstacle. It was the fact that in the middle of having nothing, no home, no security, no one coming for him, that boy had looked at the old woman beside him and seen not a burden but a relationship. Not someone to endure but someone to tend to. Marcus Hale had $300 million in a calendar booked through November and a corner office on the 42nd floor, and he had needed a 15-year-old boy with cracked sneakers to remind him what it looks like to be genuinely rich. He drank his tea. Across the table, Jalen opened his textbook. The evening light came through the east-facing window and lay across the kitchen floor in a long warm rectangle, and somewhere in the building a door closed softly, and the city went on doing what cities do, enormous and indifferent and full, if you stopped walking long enough to see it, of people quietly saving each other.